So this is part 3 of importance and scope of international economics. This video is a bit unique in a way that it's both theory as well as concepts. The distribution of the timeline is written in the comments. So the first part will be pure theory with like the basic understanding that is required to score marks and to understand the subject like upar se from the like the crux to dig deep into the subject. There will be the conceptual part which will be after the theory part that you may or may not skip as per your own convenience. So let's begin. So the second point that is covered in importance of international economics is international trade policy. Now, when you divide this word, when you divide this kind of group of words, the phrase, you will get trade policy on one side and international on one side. So trade policies basically mean agreements between two sets of individuals or two sets of organizations, or an organization or an individual, or sometimes even two countries. So now international, when the word international is added to it, it becomes trade agreements between two countries. What do these trade policies determine? They determine the tax rates that will be imposed, the goods which will be restricted from importing, goods which will be subsidized, goods which will be sold at a discount. This international trade policy, whenever two countries come together and decide on a trade policy, a trade agreement, it shows something more than an economic agreement. It shows a political agreement. It sometimes is a notion of peace. Sometimes it's a notion of dissatisfaction towards the country, towards the other country. So basically, international trade policy, what ma'am says in the video, is how a country decides whether to stay as an open economy or a closed economy. By open economy, she means that, and as she said, foreign investments that come into India. Let's take India as example. India was a closed economy of sorts, a semi-closed economy, you can say, of sorts, wherein before 1991, wherein it restricted companies from entering, and there were n number of restrictions in terms of production, in terms of profit making, in terms of total investments into capital, machinery, etc., etc. There were restrictions even on bringing in labor and new techniques as well of production into the country. So India was semi-closed, and another example of a closed economy could be Japan after the 1600s, I believe, 1600s or 1700s, wherein they closed themselves from any external trade of sorts. They were independent and they were self-sufficient for a couple of centuries, and then America later went to trade there, and yeah, that's history though, and not the strongest subject. So yeah, let's get back to economics. So basically, when you talk about a closed economy, right, it means that you're restricting other people from entering into your own space. You want, it's kind of protectionism of sorts. You're not letting your own people get outside experience, get outside technology, get a view of what modernization is or development in techniques is. You're restricting your own people from getting competition from big companies that exist outside the borders of that nation. And yeah, that's the whole gist of a closed economy. Whereas an open economy basically means that any company can, so long as they follow the rules and follow the laws of that country where they want to enter, they can enter without any hindrance of any sorts. They can launch IPOs, they can raise money, they can employ people of that country, they can generate revenue from that country, they can produce there, they can export from there, they can import from there, and all these facilities that would be available to a local businessman would be available to that company. However, every country has different rules in terms of how much protectionism do they want to kind of impose on their on other countries, and how much do they want to actually welcome others. The fact is that India has greatly boosted in foreign direct investments post the 2014 government, the NDA-led government, because of the fact that we have increased our relations, international relations, and we've kind of welcomed almost every country, every company that wants to come, and we've kind of liberalized the trade policies and all these factors which kind of make it easy to do business. The ease of doing business factor, there's an index as well which kind of values the ease of doing business of a particular country in a particular country, and India has rose in the ranks throughout these years because of the fact that we kind of understood that because India's currency is rupees and it's not the strongest competitor of euro and dollar and perhaps even the yen, this kind of realization that came led to invitations to other countries to trade in India, and thus this kind of opening up to other countries led to higher foreign exchange reserves and higher. Basically, we had more money. To explain it in complete layman's terms, we had more money through these international investments and international companies that came. So that's what international trade policy means: deciding whether to deciding whether to allow companies to come to your country and let them freely trade, or whether to be protectionist towards for certain industries, such as India is for railways and military defense manufacturing and all of that. So yeah, that's what international economy dictates. This subject in international economics dictates international trade policies, as it helps us understand whether we are making profits, whether our local industry is suffering, whether our people are suffering, and so on and so forth. Now, this is the point wherein I am going to start the conceptual part of international trade policy. So there are 4 chapters. I think there are 5 chapters actually in one of our reference books, which has been suggested by our ma'am, the Salvatore one on international economics. I don't remember the name specifically, but the chapter number is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 5 chapters, and these 5 chapters dissect the international trade policy into 5 parts. Now, expecting you to go through all of these 5 points, if the teacher is expecting us to go through all the 5 points, then it might be a bit difficult, considering it's around 150 pages or something like that. But it's really interesting to read, so I would definitely suggest you to read that. However, I've tried to summarize it to some extent to my best ability in this presentation. So the first point: trade restrictions through tariff. So if you remember the theory video, I believe, yeah, it was the theory video. The third timeline, if you'll see the third section of the timeline, it talks about tariff and non-tariff barriers to some extent. This is kind of a continuation to that. So it's said in economics, it said that tariff barriers, import taxes, and these tariff barriers are one of the most important trade restrictions historically. Before there was this modernization of economics, these were the most simple and the most basic barriers that were there. and these were present through, again going back to the historical times, these were present since kings and kingdoms alike. Many kingdoms impose these kind of extra money of sorts, where if you wanted to enter into the borders of the nation for merchants, and if you had something special, some special material, you were allowed to charge extra for that, but a part of it would go to the king and all of that. So these were kind of the trade restrictions which existed prior to these all these economic theories as such. And so basically they are divided into import tariffs and export tariffs. Taxes are divided into import tariffs and export tariffs. As said, import tariffs are levied usually by industrial countries with labor intensive industries. So India too levies an import tariff. So basically, whenever you want to import good machinery or advanced technology, robots or anything along those lines, machines which require little to no manual labor, you are kind of threatening the local labor markets and local labor industries, and you might leave a large chunk of people unemployed because of that. So in order to protect the local employment, to protect the local people, governments regulate governments impose import tariffs to regulate the industrial sector. So that's the import tariffs and export tariffs. Now, export tariffs are unique in a way that countries like USA don't impose export tariffs. However, developing countries do, including India. So these are like taxes which are levied on exports. So whatever you are selling from India to some other country, mangoes, I don't know why fruits are coming into my mind, but mangoes, chicus, grapes, and perhaps technology kits, PPE kits, then medicinal vaccines too. Vaccines have been now considered as a special commodity, essential commodity of sorts. So those the restrictions on them are different. But pharmaceutical commodities such as paracetamols and all these hydrochloroquine and all these commodities which are used for in the field of medicine, all these have heavy export taxes, heavy export tariffs, because of the fact that in other countries, India is considered to be the kind of the hub of pharmacies in the world. So because of the fact that we are so good at it, we might charge a little extra in order to gain higher revenues. So we earn a lot through this export tariffs. Now there are three types of these are the three kind of categories of tariffs. All of this is in the book in great detail, but summarizing it: ad valorem, specific, and compound tariff. These terms might be covered in the future in the topic terms of trade, but that's, I guess, unit 4 and we are currently in unit 1, so I won't explain in great detail. But ad valorem basically means a percentage, specific means a fixed amount per unit, and compound tariff is a mixture of both. So if there is like 15%, I think Tesla cars have 100% ad valorem tariff. So if you want to import a Tesla car, you have to pay double the amount of its actual cost. That's 100% tariff. I think so. Then specific tariffs are, I'm not sure if my example is right, but in a hypothetical situation, let's say if you're importing certain samples of wood for construction. So because there might be countries from where you're importing exotic wood, which is only available in that country. Importing that from that country, the government would levy a certain kind of fixed sum per, let's say, kg or per 100 logs or something like that. a specific duty which is only specific, as the name suggests, to that commodity. The example may not be precise. I believe I have read this somewhere, but I'm not 100% sure. However, the explanation is somewhere along the lines of that. In India, ad valorem tariff is charged on around 94% of the total tariff lines. Tariff lines basically means the list of commodities which are imported in India and exported from India. And they have all these HSN codes called as the harmonized codes, which help individuals identify what's the product that they are dealing in. And specific tariff is charged on around 6% of the total commodities. Now, the next point in these international trade policies is non-tariff barriers and the new protectionism. Very interesting point, can be read in great detail. This can be considered as one of the, okay, spoilers, but this can be considered as one of the more politically influenced economic factors than the usual, mathematical or, conceptual or something like that. This is more influenced by the politics of companies and politics of governments and how they want to be with other countries than actual calculations and actual answers or actual analysis which might be referred to. So the first is import quotas. Quotas has already been covered before, but I'd love to repeat that. Quotas basically means a restriction of sorts, a maximum limit beyond which you cannot import something in a country. In India, there are many import quotas. Let's say you're a dealer. I used the same example before, but basically if you're a dealer wherein you import goods from one country and just sell it off in India at a higher price, at a markup price, which is legal, if you're following all the taxes and paying all the taxes and doing all the legal stuff. So let's say the local demand is increasing and people love those goods, and they feel that all the hassle, they can avoid all the hassle of ordering it from abroad by directly telling you to give it to them. So let's say the demand increases to 1 lakh units, but there's an import quota of only 50,000 units. So you cannot import beyond 50,000 units. So if that happens, then you're not earning beyond, because the supply is restricted. The demand might increase, but because the demand might rise, but because of the restriction on supply, the supply may not rise, and thus there might be a price rise and all these factors. Usually government imposes import quotas in order to promote local markets and to promote local products. The next 2 points are interesting, very interesting actually. Voluntary export restraints. These are the kind of the most political restrictions that can be imposed. Basically, in this, the roles are reversed, Uno reverse of sorts. The importing country tells the exporting country, an industry, the importing country selects an industry of the exporting country. In order to kind of simplify the explanation, basically the importing country is the buyer and the exporting country is the seller. So the buyer, the importing country, tells the seller, the exporting country, that you have to reduce the supply. You have to voluntarily impose trade restrictions on yourself. Basically telling the seller, don't sell more commodities. We don't need, you'll have to reduce the commodities or you have to increase the price. Why does this happen? Because the importing country, that is the local buyer, the importing country has its own domestic production also, right? So these exporting countries and the goods of the exporting countries might possess as a threat to the local industry because of their low prices, or because of the fact that their quality is much more superior. It might be a threat to the local industry, and in order to prevent this, they request is just a formal word, but they kind of threaten, quite frankly, the exporting country to have voluntary trade restrictions on that industry. Now, why would an exporting country do that, right? I mean, they could just say no, right? But no, they can't, because of the fact that the importing country, now it's only putting asking for voluntary trade restrictions in certain industry, perhaps cars or steel or something like that. But if the exporting country says no, right, the importing country will now pose restrictions on all the sectors, and the entire trade policy that these two countries have amongst each other will be changed completely, and the exporting country might be threatened by this position, and thus it might subside to the demands of the importing country. An example of this would be the 1980, this is given in the book, by the way. 1980s, there was the car market in USA was kind of not performing really well. So there was the production in the automobile sector fell by 1/3, so 33% fall in production. And as a result, the share of imports in terms of automobile rose from 18% to 30%. So 30% of the local cars that were in America were imported from Japan. Not all of them were from Japan, but the majority of the shares were kind of owned. The majority share of imports were of Japan. So what did America do? Well, the three major companies, right? The General Motors, GM, then Ford and Chrysler. These three major companies kind of influenced the government towards imposing these voluntary trade restrictions on Japan, saying that, okay, Japan, you need to decrease your supply, or you can increase your cost, whatever you wanted to do, and just sort this out. Our local people, the American people, should buy American cars. They shouldn't buy Japanese cars. And if you think about it, right, Japan is a country whose economy is severely dependent on exports and imports. Its local production is decent, but then the country kind of relies heavily on exports, right from post World War II. It has been heavily involved in exports and imports. So it couldn't afford a country like USA imposing heavy trade restrictions on them, right? So they were like, okay, we agree. As a result, now the issue of this was that the local companies, right, in America, they did not solve their production problem, or they didn't change the prices in order to meet the demand, or they didn't do anything like that. They increased their prices, and Japanese cars prices also increased because of the fact that there were restrictions on them. So the loser of this wasn't the companies in America, wasn't the Japanese. The loser of this was American public, wherein they had to pay $600 extra of that time for an American car, and the prices for a Japanese car increased by $1,100, which is a lot if you think about it. And for those times, considering inflation and all of that, it's a huge increase in price. So all these restrictions, this was completely political. There was nothing economic about this. I mean, yeah, the American car companies were facing a major backlash, but it was kind of their fault as well. And they continued their practices until when Japan started their own manufacturing in America. So now they were producing cars within the American boundaries, and as a result, now the American companies which were there, they needed to make major changes in their decision making in relation to their automobile sector. Next is dumping. Now the video is very long, I can see that. Quickly, dumping is of three types: sporadic dumping, predatory dumping, persistent dumping. Dumping basically means if let's say USA mein you get I don't know, man. This is let's say computers of Apple sells computers in USA at, let's say, 60,000 rupees. I am using rupees for better. 60,000 rupees. A previous model, perhaps a 2015 model, sells it at 60,000 rupees. Some old MacBook or some old iMac or Mac Pro, something like that. It sells at 60,000 rupees. But in India, after all the taxes also, the final price comes at 50,000 rupees. So it's in its local area, it's in its hometown, in its home country, it's selling it at a higher price than that of another country. So this is called as dumping of sorts. You know why? Because dumping basically means throwing the garbage out. So all these old models or old PCs which might not be up to date and the company wants to clear its stock, it reduces the prices in other countries, usually developing countries or underdeveloped countries, and people buy these commodities, and you know they're happy with it because they got it at a very low price. But then the company is kind of selling cheap old models, and in order to prevent that, there are anti-dumping laws as well. These also include the waste management laws. Waste management in the sense that the e-waste that is dumped by other countries into third world countries, these also dominate that. But these might be there in our portion, these might not be there. So not spending too much time. Perhaps in the future, if they are a part of our portion, I'll explain them. Then you have the economic integration through custom unions and FTAs. Fancy words, basically means there are free trade areas and custom unions. Free trade areas, what are examples of these free trade areas? There's the North America Free Trade Association, and then there's the European Free Trade Association, if I'm not wrong. And NAFTA is the North America Free Trade Agreement, and EFTA is European Free Trade Association. It basically means, okay, these are a group of countries that come together and they decide, okay, amongst us, right, they kind of create an inner circle of sorts, कि तू मेरा भाई है मैं तेरा भाई हूँ, kind of sorts, wherein okay, you're my buddy, I'm your buddy, let's collaborate, and basically they have no trade restrictions amongst themselves. The member countries don't have restrictions among themselves. However, the non-member countries, right, they can have their own trade barriers. Like USA can have their own trade barriers with India, and perhaps some other country might have their own trade barriers with India separately, even though they both are a part of NAFTA. These basically mean free trade areas. Custom unions are very similar to free trade areas. The only difference is that, okay, they not only have common or no trade restrictions, no trade barriers amongst themselves, but also their economic policies come together and benefit each other in a way that, okay, let's say European Union mein Greece. So Greece always faces a lot of crisis, every couple of years or every couple of decades. So then other European Union countries kind of help it out of its economic crisis. Germany usually helps it out a lot. So these are kind of harmonized economic policies. They kind of create an internal cooperation of sorts and bonding of sorts within these countries. Not very important to know. I mean, this is important to know, but then it's kind of, you can read about it, and there's the GATT also, the General Agreement of Trade, and what's the full form? I forgot about this, but yeah, there's the GATT. Then there's all these rounds that happen. Reading about all of this and knowing all this is good. I don't think they'll be a part of our theory, but if they are a part of our theory in the future, I will indeed explain all of it in great detail. Then these next 2 points are kind of the classic. Uh, these can be a part of any question related to international economics or sorts, wherein and economic development can be written in any theoretical answer of economics, and you'll at least get 1 mark. So basically, international trade and economic development. When new companies come, when new policies are made, it not only develops it not only increases the foreign exchange reserves and not only develops the economy, but it also increases the cost of living, the cost of living, and at the same time the standard of living as well. Data shows in India also, after LPG, the standard of living rose by great extents, because not only were there new employment opportunities, but at the same time there were new investment opportunities, and there were new spending opportunities too. So because there were greater spending opportunities, companies wanted to see that how does Indian market and Indian people react, how do Indian people react to our products. And this led to newer newer companies and new brands and all of that. So this increases economic development as standard of living increases, quality of life increases, healthcare conditions and all of that increases through international trade. And next is international resource movement and MNCs. Usually this happens n number of times. Now let's say a country like North Korea, right? North Korea has immense natural resources in terms of I think copper and all these resources which help in data, internet, and all these data travel and faster internet, and all these wires that are require all the material required in all these wires in satellites and all of that. The raw materials are abundant in North Korea, but North Korea is kind of a dictatorship of sorts, and that guy doesn't think much about using its resources. So what did he do? He gave the tenders to China, and China started mining and digging all the resources there. So resource movement happens from a place where the resource might have no use to a place where it actually kind of can be used on a very large scale. Another example of this can be the Beluga Caviar. The Beluga Caviar is produced kind of, yeah, you can say produce as well. Basically, it's in Middle Asia, I think, below Russia. So whatever you can tell that northeast part of Asia or such, above China and below Russia, around that part. Kazakhstan ke left side mein, and there's this whole Beluga Caviar industry. Beluga Caviar is an exquisite luxury, and it's used on a very large scale in restaurants, and they charge a lot of money for that. But that resources cannot be used by the local local people at a level that a restaurant would use that, right? So a resource movement of sorts happens. Many examples are there for this. The Parmesan cheese in, I think, Italy, and all these brands that expand and supply to the international market because the demand and the prices that they offer are much more higher. And then there are obviously the multinational corporations, which not only increase employment but also increase international cooperation and international peace as well. So that's it. This is the conceptual part. The video is a bit long, and I don't expect anyone to see the entire part of it. But if you have, thank you for watching. I hope I could provide some value, and yeah, thank you.